Hello, I'm Dan Tasker. I was invited by the New Zealand chapter of the IIBA to present a series of webinars. These are based on a set of articles I wrote called Requirements in Context. It was published in modernanalyst.com. The original objective of that series was threefold. First of all, to help business analysts distinguish between high-level requirements and detail requirements. And in doing so, I wanted to be able to present examples, an end-to-end set of examples rather than just random small examples. So that was the second objective. And my third objective was to be able to show example requirements captured in templates. So the case study that was published along with those articles includes the templates and the requirements documented in those templates. So this series of webinars is going to revisit the main concepts from that series, and we've separated out into 4 parts. This is part 1. So we'll look at 5 fundamental information system capability types. An information system can really do one of 5 different things at any one time. So we'll look at that. In the second webinar, we'll get into high-level requirements and what it takes to keep them high level. Third seminar, before we get into detail requirements, we're going to talk about the vocabulary for requirements, because the data part of your functional requirements represents nouns, and they need to be well-defined and detail related to them. So we'll talk about that before we get into webinar 4, which will look at detailed requirements. So just like we were trying to keep high-level requirements high level, the 4th webinar will give examples of sufficient detail in detailed requirements. And we've added a 5th seminar where anyone that wants to bring some examples of requirements will have those submitted before the webinar. We can discuss those compared to what the concepts that were presented in the first 4 seminars. So hopefully that will be useful. So today we'll start with the series objectives rather than the series of article objectives. We'll establish some terminology that we'll use throughout the series. We will then look at those 5 fundamental capability types one at a time, and we'll end today's seminar with one example of a capability-based requirement to set the scene for the next seminar. Okay, what we're trying to achieve here is pain points related to requirements, and nothing illustrates that better, I believe, than this cartoon that's been around for years. That you can see the date on this, 1973. So almost 50 years. This has been a pain point related to requirements. You still see versions of this cartoon pinned up in IS shops wherever you are. What specifically we'll be looking at related requirements, number 1, levels of detail. Existing requirements can be of any kind of level of detail. We're going to focus on 2 specific levels to help clarify that. Then there's the fact that requirements we see in documents documented textually. So getting that text well written in a high quality is a pain point. So we're going to address that by hopefully reducing the amount of text needed in the requirements. And reusability. It turns out there's a fair amount of reusability that we can get based on the vocabulary. So we'll address that reusability when we talk about vocabulary. And finally, the fact that requirements generally are not of good quality. We'll use quality as a theme throughout the webinar to show that the way we're presenting, the way we're documenting requirements meets quality standards. So those are the pain points. Again, what the solution I talked about in my series, my requirements in context series, had presented 2 well-defined levels. That addresses the pain point of levels of detail. Textual content, we'll see we can move what looks to be in textual versions of requirements into structured contexts. Those are the spreadsheet templates we're talking about. And reusability, as I said a minute ago, the vocabulary, we'll talk about a data dictionary. Again, a structured way to capture detail about requirements related to the information in information systems. In quality, we'll hopefully see by the end of this webinar that by addressing those pain points with 2 well-defined levels, using structured contents and a business data dictionary, we will see, we'll meet the quality standards that we use to measure requirements. Okay, I also wanted to set the scope of requirements in context. What we're presenting here is about documenting requirements. So when you deliver a set of requirements, you have documented them. That's what we're going to try to address, is what that deliverable is. We're looking primarily at project managed changes. So these are not just little bitty changes, requirements for those here and there, but within the context of a managed IT project. And also we're looking at requirements just for information system-based solutions. So you can have requirements for physical products. You can be wanting to design a new washing machine, and what's required for designing and building that washing machine, the end result, the quality you want out of that, that's not in scope for this series, this seminar series. So just information systems, and we will primarily be looking at functional capabilities. Okay. And we will, in addition to the functional capabilities, we'll add in the idea of operational details. So we'll see how operating the delivered solution has some necessary required detail. And lastly, some capability independent detail, that data detail, that's within scope. That'll be our seminar 3. What's out of scope, what I won't be addressing, what I can't help you with, I can't solve all of everyone's problems, wish I could. Business process improvement. So that's a business problem at times. We have a process that's broken or it can be improved. That's really not a requirements problem. That's getting the process fixed before you look at solutions. I will say that providing an IT-based solution, you'll be able to improve processes just by making certain information available online. An existing process may rely on a report, but if you give that user, if that user is allowed to have online access, you can give them more up-to-the-minute information. So there's the potential to naturally improve a process with some automated support. Okay, out of scope also is the concept of usability or user experience. We'll be talking about user interfaces and reports and how usable those are, or that you're delivering the best user experience. That too is a separate exercise. If a project's got the time and budget to spend on improving user experience, that's great, but that's in addition to the requirements of what actually has to be the content of that series. Stakeholder management. I can't help you there. That's a political thing. If the project can't get appropriate stakeholder resources, that's a risk for the project. We won't be addressing that. We will go on the assumption that appropriate subject matter experts are available to the requirements gathering process and helping us document them. System level quality of service. This is the new name for non-functional requirements. A system must be secure, it must be reliable, it must be user-friendly. Those are system-level quality of service issues. Okay, I said earlier, in scope will be capability-specific operational details. That's related to that, but we'll look at those at the individual level. not at the overall NFR level. And then there's potentially architectural issues. I won't say anything about that now, we'll touch on that later. And lastly, I won't be offering elicitation techniques. That again is a separate BA skill. What we're interested primarily is the result of your elicitation, what's your document. So that's the scope of requirements in context, what I call requirements in context, what we'll be talking about in this series. These things we won't be offering solutions to. Those are all separate issues. Right, so we can move on to terminology. We will have a look at the term requirement, at some requirement types terms. We'll look at the term quality from the context of requirements. We'll talk briefly about an information system and what we mean by that. Stakeholder, we'll say a few words about that, what we mean by that term, and an IT-based solution, because the term solution when used with requirements is usually a no-no. We say requirements are about what you want to do, not solutioning, but in fact, solution is a factor, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so our first term, requirement. I've taken this from the IIBA BABOK glossary. They define a requirement as a usable representation of a need, presumably a business need. That's a nice definition, and what I really appreciate in definitions, along with definitions, are examples. So rather than beat on that definition, let's look at 3 examples of commonly recognized requirements. So here's one. A user shall be able to log on to the system. Okay, we've probably everyone's seen a requirement like this in one shape or another. Presumably that's some representation of a need. Here's another one. A customer shall be assigned a unique identifier. Again, we recognize this as a requirement. What its quality is, whether it's high level, detailed, we'll discuss this during the series. And here's a third example. A customer shall be able to print a copy of their trip details. This is one of the examples from the case study, and we'll use this throughout the webinar. We'll come back to this. So that's when we use the term requirement, we're talking really about a documented need of someone involved in the solution. Okay, requirement types. Originally, back in the old days, we used to talk about software requirements, hardware requirements, and network requirements. Back before the internet gave us connectivity, before we had virtual hardware, these were big issues. There still are hardware and network requirements potentially, but functionality of the solution comes from software requirements. Then we hear the term business requirement as just a general term, and most of us have seen a document called a BRD, a business requirements document. And what's in that document is presumably requirements and from the business. But again, we have a leveling problem. So the general term business requirement can have a general meaning. We'll try to be more specific. Then we hear the concepts of functional requirements and non-functional requirements, dividing them into that. And so, as I said earlier, we're going to focus on functional requirements and avoid system-level non-functional requirements. The terms I've used in my career in an IT project are typically high-level requirements. We start with those, and once we have those, then we go into detail requirements. This is classic waterfall. Agile claims they don't need either high-level or detailed requirements. I may say a few words about that before the end of the series, but I will use the terms high-level and detail requirements. The BABOK gives these terms for requirements. They talk about business requirements, stakeholder requirements, and solution requirements as 3 different levels, and they define what they are. They define business requirement as goals or objectives. And then stakeholder requirements presumably map closer to the concept of high-level requirements when you're looking at a particular solution, and what they call solution requirements. So they've used the S word. What they say is they are more detailed than the stakeholder requirements. Solution requirements are what you want to build. I won't say much more about that. They've introduced a fourth term called transition requirements. These are requirements that aren't about this ongoing running system, but requirements you have during delivering this solution that need to be accounted for. And we'll actually see an example of a transition requirement in the third webinar series when we talk about data needs. And then there's this concept of product requirements. We hear this a lot, again, with the agile world, where you have a product owner, and what you deliver for that product owner are all of these little bits of functionality. And the reason you don't need requirements is because that owner is right there. We'll talk more about that. But what this distinction I want to make is between an engineered product, I mentioned the washing machine example, and what is being called these days digital products. A digital product is something you sell, something a customer buys or rents, but they are supported by software. So we will see an example of product requirements in the case study. Okay, requirement quality. There's a set of criteria, industry standard. The BABOK offers some. I'm about to go through those, but these are, you'll find these not only in the BABOK, but anywhere on the web. So the first standard is that a requirement be atomic. And what they generally mean by that is textually self-contained. So a given requirement doesn't reference some other requirement and say, by the way, remember that requirement over there? Well, here's some more detail about it, or here's something you need in addition to that. So they should be atomic. They should be, a given requirement should be complete. And what that means is the appropriate amount of detail for whatever level that requirement is. And again, if you have an infinite number of possible levels of requirement, then you'll have different levels compared for each. We will talk about 2 specific levels. Consistent, right? Well, this is where the user has given you their need. You have documented it consistently with what they said, and not just what they said, but what they meant. Concise. This is where you don't want a requirement to waffle on about this, that, and the other. So a given requirement should only be about the one need. So I've seen requirements run on for paragraphs or even pages of textual documentation, and they can be less than concise. Feasible, right? What that means is it can actually be delivered within the product limits. Okay, so cold fusion would be a requirement currently not feasible, but for information systems, we're going to want reports, we're going to want user interfaces. Most of those will be feasible depending on how much information you want in them, how you want that information presented, and how much time and money the project has to deliver that. So feasibility is one quality measure. Unambiguous. By that, they mean a clear representation of the need. So you don't want to just take what the user said, write it down. They understood something, you understood something, but if you don't have enough detail to make it unambiguous, you have poor quality. Testable. Requirements should be testable. And what this means really for an information system is that whatever is delivered can perform as expected. Okay, this is where I have a problem with the IIBA business requirement that's a goal or an objective. Okay, these are not testable in the same sense that you would test a user interface. So I won't waffle on more about that at the moment, but a high-level requirement you wouldn't expect to test, but the detailed requirement you would hope to be testable. Prioritize, that's an easy one. There's lots of prioritization schemes. Moscow is a popular one. Must have, should have, could have, or won't have. High, level, and low, doesn't matter, but they should be prioritized. And lastly, they should be understandable. So this is where a requirement needs to use terms that are understood both by the business and by the downstream delivery team. So the testing team, the designers, the developers, that sort of thing. So we'll talk, hopefully seminar 3 will help us address the understandable quality measure. Then we have a couple of criteria for a full set of requirements. So everything we've been talking about so far has been about an individual requirement. Once you've got a set and you're looking to get them reviewed and signed off, a couple of quality checkpoints. First of all, consistency. So this is where you have more than one requirement now, none of them conflict with each other. So this is like a matrix of this to that. Does anything conflict with anything else? Because if they do, then you're asking the solution to do two things that conflict with each other. So you need a consistency test. And here's the trickier one, completeness. So you've finished the requirements, documenting everything you think there needs to be. Two levels of completeness. One, does it have all the detail you need to carry forward to the next step? And secondly, have you actually missed some capability? So we'll talk about that during this seminar. So that's the term quality. That's our measure for that. Let's look at what we mean by an information system. Again, I went back to the BABOK glossary, an integrated set of components collecting, storing, and processing data and providing information, knowledge, and here's our friend, digital products. Okay, so I like to think of an information system visually. Here's a use case context diagram. So the system, set of components, these things with inside the boundary are what the system is capable of doing, storing, processing data, providing information. So this particular system would support these types of actors in the UML use case terminology. So what you don't see here is this concept of generic data storage capabilities. So an information system where we talk about storing data, there's some database management system that comes along with the information system. That's how the information related to these components is stored. Information systems these days offer both online access and batch processing. That's pretty much a given these days. An information system tends to have domain-specific functional capabilities, and we'll talk about those in the next seminar where we talk about high-level requirements. We'll look at functional capabilities for the different areas of a business. And then there are potentially architectural contexts for an information system. So for example, we can have an architect in an organization who says all of our systems will use this particular technology. It will all be Windows-based, or it will all be Unix-based, or whatever. If your organization has technical architects, that will be part of what your information system can operate within. We have the concept of an application architecture. If you're using the web and you're using a consistent set of screens, there's usually an application framework. So all of your components should use that same framework. So that's an architectural context. And lastly, some organizations have data architects. And if you have a data architect, one of the main things they look after is your database management system in terms of what data is allowed to be stored, what data isn't. So these are all characteristics of an information system. Stakeholder. Again, the BABOK definition, a group or individual with a relationship to the change, the need, or the solution. And the BABOK goes on to list about 15 types of stakeholders, including sponsors and subject matter experts, a project leader, that sort of thing. So what I'm suggesting is we think of stakeholders in two categories. One, stakeholders that are really requirements related parties, excuse me. These are the sponsor. Okay, the sponsor I've shown here as a little green highlighted actor, green for money. The sponsor has the budget, and the sponsor really has the final sign-off authority. And so whether something is in scope or out of scope depends on whether there's sufficient budget, and if something that needs to be in scope is going to increase the budget, the sponsor is involved. The other requirements related parties I'm calling domain subject matter experts, SMEs. These people are our requirements source. And I've outlined these little guys in gold because they are worth their weight in gold. Okay, these are the types of stakeholders that we care about most in the requirements gathering, the requirements documenting area. They're our source of documents. The other stakeholders, any other kind, I call just interested parties. Okay, we have solution users. They're definitely an interested party. There are lots of those, presumably. Some of those users, the ones who are experts in what they do, are our subject matter experts. We're looking for those. Others are there because they want to be. Sometimes you get users because they're the only ones that are available. The ones that really know what they're doing are busy. They have their day jobs. They can't be spared. So the solution users and customers now these days with self-service are also a form of user. And we always say, well, customer input into a solution is very important. That's absolutely true. That comes under user experience. Okay, so if you have the money and the availability to get to customers and see what they need, that's great. If you don't, then you have to take your best guess. And lastly, all of the types of members of the delivery team. So I mentioned a minute ago, the project manager, BA is a member of the delivery team. Testers often sit in on requirements sessions to get their job kick-started. Designers, that sort of thing, and operators, the people that are ultimately going to be responsible for running the system. These are all, by definition, stakeholders, but I class these as interested parties. We want to focus on those that provide us the money and those that can give us some input. Sorry, I had to pause the recording there for just a moment, so we'll carry on. So basically, yes, stakeholder, the requirements related party, that's what we are really trying to achieve for quality requirements. So let's look at what we mean by an IT-based solution. So the BABOK says a specific way of satisfying one or more needs in a context. Okay, so we have the concept of rationale. That's why you want to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there should either be a business objective or some business problem that's of interest. That's why we want to change. There will be different sizes of objectives and problems. Some are medium to large. When they are, there's a lot of money involved. So this is where we would have a managed project. If it's a small change, you just need one additional report. You need a couple of extra fields on a screen. Typically, a shop will have a change management process. So it's still part of an IT-based solution, but you don't have a managed project. Then there's the organizational context. For a given solution, it may be a whole new capability. So if it's new to the organization, where's the expertise? So you either need to develop the expertise or obtain it. You can hire it in, you can get consultants in. So this is the idea of subject matter experts when your solution involves something that the organization as a whole doesn't know about. Then the context may be that you have something existing and you want to change that. So you have your existing understanding, your existing capabilities, and the subject matter experts you have can help you get to the change. What we typically do there, we talk about mapping from current system to the new system. And lastly, you can have a change that says, we're going to fix this by getting rid of something. I won't go into what you might get rid of, but there, what you really need to do is manage the loss of that capability. That may involve changes to an information system. You make certain products unavailable for purchase, that sort of thing. But this is your organizational context. So a solution has a rationale, depending on the size you do or don't have a project. And from our perspective, we said we're only worried about requirements for ones that are managed within the context of a project. So the solution may involve a combination of these, a few new capabilities, some existing ones we're changing, eliminating any chop and change. So that's what we're talking about, an existing solution. And because a large solution is going to have a managed project, right, the solution typically comes from a business case. So that's why I claim you can use the concept of solution and requirements. And we'll look at that when we look at the case study example. So we'll talk more about that. Capability types. Okay, so this is what we were originally here for. This I've got a definition of. Ways to get domain-specific data into or out of an information system, or to access existing data for referencing, updating, or deleting. So we have 5 types. User interface, okay, as one of the types of capabilities. And what the user interface will do for us, it allows authorized users to manually enter data. Okay, this, we call it manual data entry. You have users with keyboards or scanners or whatever. They may be just referencing, they may go into the system to update or request deletion of existing data. So the user interface is there for online access to data. That's one of the capability types of an information system. Reports is a capability type. Outputs system data, a report, it outputs system data in human readable format for reference offline. Remember a little bit ago I said you can improve a business process if you're now giving the user online access to data they used to have to report. So this is an example of a change that could improve a process by just adding an online capability for a particular user type. Data import is our third capability type. Data import supports automated input rather than manual input of data. This comes in machine readable format, resulting in system data. Okay, so it's coming into the system. It's going to become system data, can be adding data. The import can be bringing updates to us. An import can be telling us about data that needs to be deleted. So the main difference between a data import and a user interface is this is machine readable, okay, and it's automated rather than manual. Similar to a data import, a data export, this time outputs system data, again in machine readable format. Like a report, it's intended to be used by someone that isn't accessing the system directly, but presumably it's some other system. That's why we have it in machine readable format. This other system will use it for data importing. So that's the fourth capability type. Lastly, We have what I call an automated function. So this is fully automated. Uses system data to create new data, update existing data, or delete, again, existing system data. So this is neither coming in, going out. This is internal to the system. And it is producing data. It's creating new data within the system. So batch jobs are examples of automated functions, and we'll see examples of that. Okay, so those are the 5 capability types. Again, the rest of this series in the seminar is going to use those capability types to help us get quality requirements. Let's see what a requirement looks like that uses that. Okay, we say a requirement that is capability based identifies a user type. It represents a unit of delivery. Those capability types are really a unit of delivery. So example, a specific report. And a capability type based requirement is really the start of a conversation. We'll talk about that next time when we look at some requirement types. So the example of that is the one I've already presented. A customer shall be able to print their booking confirmation details. That's one of the example requirements. Here is our type of user, customer, and this is the unit of delivery. So they want to print their booking confirmation details. So this is going to be a report because they want to access them offline. That's why they want to be able to print them. So that's an example of a requirement using one of those 5 capability types. Believe me, we'll come back to those. Oh, now that requirement that I just showed you, that was in shall statement format. We call these a formal classic waterfall requirement. The customer shall be able to print their booking confirmation details. The word shall is used because it doesn't imply any priority. You often see requirements written, a customer must be able to do this, or a customer should be able to do this. Okay, that implies some priority, and priority we will deal with separate from the textual requirement. A user story is very similar to this, actually. We could produce that same requirement in user story fashion. As a customer, I need to be able to print my booking confirmation details so that I have those details available offline. User stories have this third component where they include the value of this particular story. The reason user stories want the value in every story is because user stories are used in Agile. Agile prioritizes their stories based on their value. So a user backlog has a set of stories. Each one says how valuable it is. With our friend, the classic waterfall, and a whole bunch of shall statements, the value of delivering that solution comes from the business case. So every requirement in scope is supporting that value. So we don't have to individually rate these things of higher or lower value. We do give them a priority. We say we want this more than we want the other, but we don't have to make up some value. There's a third form of the same requirement, and that's in a use case bubble. Not a detailed use case, but the information we had in that requirement, here is a bubble that says produce a booking confirmation. And by the way, the customer is the one that we are producing it for. So this is a visual UML use case representation of this same shall statement. What I want to show you here is the documented version of this requirement. Remember, I said in scope is documenting the requirement. So here's the shall statement. The customer shall be able to print their booking confirmation status. That is the one sentence requirement. Here is the priority. We're saying this is a must-have, and I've started to use the Agile concept of minimum viable product. Anything that's a must-have, if you don't have it, you can't deliver the solution. Okay. I've identified when I documented it, which capability type is it? This is a report. So, and what you're seeing here is a quick example of those templates. So this is a spreadsheet template. You could filter your requirements by capability type. You could see all of the reports, all of the user interfaces, etc. And this particular one I've identified as a high-level requirement. So we know the level of detail we expect. So all we expect is a single sentence. So let's compare this with our quality check. Is it atomic? Yes, technically self-contained. Is it complete within its level of detail? I believe so. It says who the need is for and what they need. Is it consistent with what was needed? The user said, the subject matter expert said customers need a printed copy of their itinerary, their booking confirmation. So yes. Concise, it's only about that. We said, yes, this is the need we want. Feasible, absolutely. This is a report. It's doable. Unambiguous is a clear representation of the need. So far, so good. We'll get into detail requirements where there'll be more questions of clarity, but booking confirmation, presumably that's understandable. Testable, it's a report. So the testing people in the room nodding their heads saying, yes, I know how to test a report. Prioritized, yes, not within the requirement itself, but as part of documenting it. And is it understandable? Have we used shared terminology? I can't tell you that at the moment. Webinar 3, at the end of webinar 3, we'll return to that. So that was our quality check. So that's what we have for seminar number 1. I always like to lead with takeaway points. So the first one is that information systems have 5 fundamental capability types. And we talked about that. User interface, report, we've seen the one example, data import, data export, automated functions. Before the end of the series, we'll talk more about each of these. The case study has examples of each of these, templates about related to each of these. The other takeaway point, a capability type based requirement identifies a unit of delivery. That's our goal, to define requirements for units of delivery. Okay, so next time we will talk about keeping high-level requirements high-level. We'll talk about a functional business context for requirements, and we will look at those capability types again and some more examples. So thank you for your time. I hope this has been useful, and I hope you will come back and see the next part of the seminar. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the IIBA.